We think of the founders as a bunch of intellectuals. They wrote these things and thought these thoughts, read these books. And we sometimes make the founding overly academic. Whereas I think the founders were statesmen. They're not political philosophers. They were very learned and they read these things. Yes, they were informed by these ideas. Some of them are extremely intelligent, but they were primarily statesmen. They were trying to make these ideas come to life in the context of people in America. And the one who did that more than anybody else, I think, is George Washington. He's underestimated as a thinker. He's seen as kind of a figurehead, a revolutionary general. But I think it's important to realize the extent to which his leadership was to found a country based on these ideas.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
You know, for 250 years, America has been writing its own story. It started with what you could call the world's most famous breakup letter, the Declaration of Independence. That told the world we would chart our own course and govern ourselves. But that was just our first chapter. When settlers looked west and saw the Rocky Mountains standing in their way, they didn't turn around, they kept going, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. When inventors were told something couldn't be done, they found a way to do it. When challenges appeared, Americans met them with determination, grit, and unwavering belief that no is not the final answer. That spirit of independence has driven innovation, exploration, and opportunity for generations. It's a belief that tomorrow can be better than today, that problems are meant to be solved, that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they're free to do so. As America celebrates 250 years of independence, we're looking back at the ideas and the unique American spirit that have shaped our nation from the beginning. We'll be discussing these ideas with today's guest, who is the Kirby Professor in Constitutional Government, as well as the Dean of the Van Andel Graduate School of Government at one of our favorite institutions, Hillsdale College. I want to welcome Dr. Matthew Spalding to the podcast. Dr. Spalding, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited. We've been talking about America's 250th birthday, this whole half year plus, and kind of unpacking a lot of the founding principles and, how they manifest today and encouraging people to read the Declaration of Independence and all. So I'm so excited for this conversation because we're going to just get to kind of get into the straight stuff, the meat of it. So I'm really excited for your expertise and to have this conversation. I kind of want to start with framing kind of how radical the Declaration was. Like the idea at that time to just kind of tell King George III that we're going to govern ourselves. I mean, how big of a deal was that?
No, I think you're right. It is quite radical, and we really forget the extent and the importance of that. It's very radical in the sense that Republican government had always failed, and here they are going to try it again. It was a crazy idea. They were going to go to war against England, the most powerful nation in the world. But what's really most important about it, which I think goes to the heart of the matter, why it's still a live wire today, is that in a world dominated by monarchies and despots and tyranny and tribal rule, these Americans who had ruled themselves for some time, learned how to self-govern, decided they were going to try this experiment in Republican government based on this concept that we are all equally human. That is, everyone had a right to rule themselves. That's the radical idea. I like to use the word radical as opposed to revolutionary. Revolutionary makes me think of the French Revolution and the Russians and the Chinese and all the other revolutions that followed. The American, it was a revolution since it was breaking with Britain, but it was radical. I like that word because radical means going to the root of things, as in the word radish. They went to the basic root of it, which is that in history, in political thought, in Christian thought over centuries, going back to the Greeks and Romans, this idea of what it means to be human. And updated in the modern context, this idea of human equality, which means consent. That was a radical idea in 1776, and to be perfectly honest, it's still pretty much a radical idea today. Indeed, in most parts of the world, that's not how government runs.
So, what were you mentioned about some of the past ideologies and some of the building blocks as to where the founders got their ideas? What are some of those building blocks, kind of looking back?
Well, part is one is I've been teaching this for decades and wanted to lay all this out as best I could. We oftentimes think of the Declaration in particular, but the American Revolution as a modern activity in the context of the Enlightenment and things going on around them. And the modern context is important. They were very much influenced by the civil wars in England, for instance. But they were deeply influenced by older traditions. They were clearly influenced by the Greeks and the Romans, especially the Romans. If they almost all studied law, the signers of the Declaration. Many of them knew Latin, which means they knew Cicero. Most of the signers had studied law, which means they'd studied Cicero, and many of them, not all of them, knew some Latin, which meant they also studied Cicero. So the influence of Roman law, which meant Greek ideas, was very very important. Obviously, the British common law, the rule of law system in England, they're developed over centuries, and then broadly speaking, they're deeply influenced by the culture, the Christian culture over time, and wanted to they absorbed that into their culture, despite the fact that they wanted to establish religious liberty, which was one of their key principles in order to avoid those civil wars of England. They studied history. They talked about history all the time, which meant British history. So they're very well read. They're very well studied, and all of that gets expressed in the Declaration. Jefferson calls the Declaration an expression of the American mind, which is not his expression, not his mind, but this American mind that had been developing for a couple of decades, but especially for the last years in the pamphlets debates before the Declaration.
So, as I reflect on the Declaration, it seems like a few of the radical concepts for that time that have shaped our nation are our rights come from our Creator.
Yes.
That we're entitled to the pursuit of happiness, and that all men are created equal. There's maybe some others, but those are the ones that always stand out to me.
Those are plenty to get started with.
Yeah. Are there any ones that you think were the most radical, or that you have particular insight into as to that they really have changed the course of history?
No. Well, I think those hit all the right ones. I would actually start with the opening line. Within the course of human events, we never think about this. Nowadays we think of history as this grand overarching thing over which we have no control. You're in a debate and someone says you're on the wrong side of history, but that's not how they thought. History was the course of human events, human beings, individual human beings making choices, making decisions. So part of it that kind of gives us a broad context. And they also thought that ideas transcended history. There were ideas that weren't merely our subjective opinions. So now add to that the points you've made, which are truly radical. All men are created equal. Rights do not come from government. They don't come from courts. They are grounded in our nature, or in particular, they're endowed by our Creator. And among those rights, the most important, the most fundamental and inalienable, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are truly radical ideas which enliven, and I think still enliven our society today, indeed, are very influential in the whole world at this point, precisely because of the turn that the founders made back in 1776. They rejected that old world of despots and kings, monarchs, and they turned towards this concept which fed popular government for sure, but also a notion that our rights are grounded in our fundamental humanity. Under the philosophical traditions of the Greeks and the Romans, but also the biblical, the Christian, the broad religious sense of creation, even though it was non-denominational, non-specific. That combination of things radically changed, I think, the course of world politics, so that you now then look at government very naturally and compare it to that, based on the concept of consent, equality before the law, the rule of law itself. And so it kind of centers much of our politics now less on the rulers than the ruled, the people, the ultimate source of those rights. And it grounds so much of that politics in the individual. Now, it's not an individual completely in a vacuum with nothing around them. The politics, culture, and society matters. But basically, it turns on, and the new coin of the realm, if you will, are the decisions made by those individuals, the mistakes they make, the triumphs and tragedies, how they make decisions as a governing people, as a group, the laws they passed, are they just? And the Declaration, I think, really refocused all of those questions, such that today that's how we naturally think of politics. The basic concept of liberty, to use the broad term liberty, is really kind of the catch-all, if you will, for all of those things. Right? The rise of political liberty, long over Western civilization, attrition, very slow, really takes ground in a much more practical way with the Declaration, and I would argue that is the Declaration in the world really maybe is the touchstone for that. I've always been struck by thinking about the Declaration in America, but think about the Declaration in the context of other countries. People want to come here. During the communist revolutions in Eastern Europe, there's very famous episodes where people were reading the Declaration of Independence in order to talk about escaping the imposition of communism. So I think you're absolutely right. That I think these ideas still very much shape our world.
The founders talked about virtue a fair amount. I know they were from different kind of Christian traditions and all, but they did talk about virtue a lot. So why did they believe that like personal character was essential to self-government?
Well, if you're turning away from forms of rule where an individual or an aristocracy or an oligarchy rules you, and you're turning to self-rule, that puts nuance on whether the self can rule. Not only in terms of self-governing politically, making decisions about laws, participating juries, let's say, but ultimately that rested on government of the self. So it really depended upon those virtues in order to be self-governing. The other thing I would add is think of virtues less as that kind of that old philosophical or theological sense, but think of it in very broad terms. These are human excellences, human flourishing, and they thought those were important for self-government as well.
It occurs to me that the founders really were taking a big risk here, well, in a lot of ways, but by focusing on self-government and really what I would consider rejecting a top-down authoritarian approach and going with more of a bottom-up Republican approach, they were taking a big risk because maybe everybody's too dumb, or maybe nobody participates, or maybe there's a lot of ways that can fall apart. And to put it in practice was probably quite a risk. I mean, and I know that it was shaky as it all started out in the first few decades of the country, and there were some parameters they put around it. But maybe talk to that, like the risk of putting the power with the people that are being governed.
No, you're absolutely right. The chance they were taking here was overwhelming. I mean, they had all almost to a man come from continental Europe, in particular from England, and here they were out on this frontier. First of all, literally in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by enemies, with none of the things we would consider to be the building blocks of a civilization. And they're going to start this country. So on top of all that, they're going to start this country and have people rule themselves. That is a crazy, really a crazy idea when you think about it. Now, since the end of the French and Indian War in 1763, and the colonies had really begun existing prior to that by some 50 or so years. Um, but since 1763 or so, and the time immediately before that, they were governing themselves. So they were experiencing self-government. They had their own legislatures. They were setting up their own laws. They were largely living on their own with the protection of the British Empire in terms of its navy and trade powers. So they had some experience to base it on, but it was a huge leap of faith, and I think it was a leap of faith based on their confidence in their own people, what they had already shown they were capable of doing. They were well read and well studied in these things. They had learned what we would call the arts of liberty. They also had great confidence in these ideas, as they believed it was just not to be ruled by a king or a despot, but to rule yourself, and for a people to self-govern. So I think the combination of things really pushed them, almost necessitated they take this leap once they realized that England was no longer going to allow themselves to rule to rule the colonies.
One of the famous lines is the Declaration talks about the pursuit of happiness. I think that's one of the things that sometimes we just impose our own interpretation to, depending on
Right.
what era we live in or something. What do you think it meant to the founders at that time?
That's a good question. I mean, today, of course, we hear the pursuit of happiness, and it's whatever makes you feel good, or whatever the heck you want to do with it. Now, granted, there is a lot of room there, right? The founders believed there was a lot of room for people to make mistakes, but also choose their own way in the world, have different vocations. Having said that, if we look around at what they did say, we do have some parameters. The founders, their letters, their writings, all take this concept of happiness very seriously. And they all would have known that in Greek thought, in Roman thought, in Christian thought, throughout all the great political writings, happiness is the end of man. And happiness, here goes back to your previous question, happiness is connected with virtue, living well, flourishing, being an excellent human being. And happiness ultimately meant substantive happiness. You might do different things. You might have different things you enjoy. You might have different professions. But the general things that brought substantive happiness, community, family, great friendships, but also, religious liberty is a component of happiness. So pursuing one's religious beliefs peacefully it was a component of happiness. And so there, I think there's a lot of signals that the concept of happiness, which you don't have by right, I would point out, you have a right to pursue it. But happiness itself is a substantive thing, which I would actually suggest is more like the classical understanding of happiness, which is eudaimonia, or human flourishing in a very full and complete sense.
Yeah, it seems like a concept that, man, we'd really benefit as a society to recapture or remember, because it just seems like that was such a substantive, like real sort of happiness, like what really does make man's heart feel good and be satisfied and happy, versus I feel like a lot of times now we're grasping after whimsical things or less substantive things at times. So I kind of hear you talk about it, and I'm kind of yearn for that time, where we're really focused on like community.
One of the things I think the Declaration does, and actually the thought of the founders does generally, which we've lost, is it combined the notion that we are individuals. That is the coin of the realm in humanity is the human person, the one, they make decisions, they make they think, they're rational, they are the ones that makes these choices. They govern themselves, but at the same time, they had a very firm notion that in our nature, whether you understand that nature to be created by God, or in the philosophical sense of nature that makes man unique as opposed to the other animals, that in that nature, there is something that gave us some guideposts. And it wasn't merely our individual subjective opinions. But when you think about things like happiness, virtue, what it means to be flourishing as a human being, it gave us some substance. Today, of course, we think of these things in much more narrow terms, much more personal terms, much more individual terms that really goes beyond, I think, the way it was understood by the founders. And we want to maintain that great sense of liberty that they designed or it brought into being. But we've sometimes lost the concept of how that liberty was to be understood. I always like to point out that their English language has two words that are very similar. One is freedom. The other one is liberty.
Yeah.
And the founders, to a man, chose to use the word liberty, and I was always struck by that.
That's fascinating. I'd love to hear why that is.
Freedom is first of all, it's a Germanic word, Freiheit.
Mm-hmm.
And you think of freedom in the sense that when you let your dog out at night, you set them free. It's a general word, right? The sign or the flag is flying freely. It's unrestrained. Liberty, on the other hand, is an old Roman word, libertas, and liberty is distinctly freedom for a human being. You don't give your dog liberty, but but human beings are have liberty, and so it's that sense it's a sense of freedom, but it's appropriate for a human being. So it naturally has all this additional substantive meaning to it that I think gives it a lot that we have sometimes forget.
So freedom's kind of a component of liberty, or it allows liberty to come forth. It's an element.
Yeah, well, freedom's a general term, and liberty is that specific freedom for the human person.
That's fascinating.
But that means you have to think about your freedom connected to what it means to be human, what it means to be flourishing, what it means to be a good human being, what it means to self-govern well, and it brings a lot of the substance without necessarily destroying the idea of liberty itself. Not introducing, for instance, the state to tell us these things. We're still free, but we should think of our freedom as what is the freedom appropriate for being human.
Yeah. I love that idea of responsibility, especially responsibility itself. So turning to, thinking of we know all the different characters who are the founding fathers, but is there one that you think is most misunderstood or most fascinating?
That's a good question. I mean, I think my favorite founder is George Washington. I've done other work on Washington. I think he's a fascinating figure.
I agree with you.
Mainly because, and this will be a more general concept, I suppose, that goes to why I think a lot of the founders are misunderstood. We think of the founding and the founders as a bunch of intellectuals. They wrote these things and thought these thoughts, read these books. And we sometimes make the founding overly academic, whereas I think the founders were statesmen. They're not political philosophers. They were very learned and they read these things. Yes, they were informed by these ideas. Some of them are extremely intelligent political thinkers, but they were primarily statesmen. They were trying to make these ideas come to life in the context of 18th century colonial America. And the one who did that more than anybody else, I think, is George Washington. He's underestimated as a thinker. He's seen as more kind of a figurehead, a revolutionary general. But I think it's important to realize the extent to which his leadership was to found a country based on these ideas. So I think, it's hard to capture the American founding unless you capture the dynamics of it, the story of it, the liveliness of it. Washington is best to do that. Although I think there, a lot of them, though, the Continental Congress is a body and its debates, goings on. I think John Adams is a fascinating figure, sometimes downplayed.
Yeah.
Jefferson, in his way, is quirky and odd and this, that, and the other, but is clearly brilliant and a beautiful writer. But I think the general problem is that we think of the founders. Well, again, think of George Washington up on Mount Rushmore. We think of them as distant, unconnected, and almost inhuman. And I think the best way to understand them is through reading their biographies, seeing their foibles, but also understanding what they accomplished and did. And that really brings these ideas to life in a way that they don't by really merely reading the parchment document.
That's great. I have always been fascinated by George Washington and think that he's probably the greatest American hero we got, the most consequential. But I'd love to hear you talk about him. So, you deal with young people, graduate students mostly, but you deal with young people all the time. But if you sat down with a high school student, what's one lesson about America's founding you would want them to really understand?
That's a good question. I would begin by my first premise would be kind of my previous concept, which is kind of capture the thing as a political event, which means we look at their decisions as political decisions, as the decisions of statesmen. But then I think, alluding to what we've already been talking about, what's important about the American founding? What's the electricity of the American founding? And I think it really does go back to the that moment in time, which is not merely a moment in time; it really transcends time. It's a universal, but it's brought into being in the context of the founding, in which this idea, which itself is thousands of years old, that about what it means to be a human being, a human person. The Greek and Roman concept, the Christian concept of self-rule and natural law, understanding of what human beings are. Well, that was brought to life in the context of the Declaration, and so it's that nugget, if you will, the seed. And I would want to make them help them to see that, however I could. So much of the dynamism, the inventiveness, the entrepreneurship, all these great characteristics of America, both over time and today. The reason why people come to this country in flocks is because of those ideas, and I think that it's those ideas in the Declaration. I think I'd want a high school student to know that the details, the particulars, the controversies. History is imperfect; it's messy. Yes, we can learn all that too, but get the right thing. Get the story right in its fundamental. Then we can work out the rest of it.
Well, no better time than now, right? This week leading
Absolutely.
up to the July 4th, Independence Day, 250th anniversary for America. Our company's been celebrating it this whole year, and we'll keep doing it. It's just been a wonderful, just even personal experience for me to kind of dwell on the founding principles enshrined in the Declaration, and kind of learn more about them. I get to talk to guests like you. You might be one of the most learned on this, and so this has been fascinating for me. But we've been talking about the concepts, that are contained in there, and a lot of times we read them, but we haven't internalized them and really think about them, and then really think about how they apply or should apply to our current society, government, culture. I think that we do really well to capture some of that again, let it kind of take hold of our debate and how we think about, what it means to be an American, and really let it animate us.
No, well said. Well said. I think that too often we think of this as just merely history, and I think we don't quite capture the radicalness of it, as we were saying earlier, but also how it's still alive. We debate these things, we argue about them. I mean, that itself is evidence that how important they are. So much of our politics, our life, our culture turns on what the meaning of the Declaration is. Our politics still circles around that question. Are we living up to those principles? That tells us a lot right there. So here we are, this unique moment. I was in middle school in 1976. That shaped me for the rest of my life in terms of what I wanted to study and do.
Really?
But it's a unique moment. People remember this. So it's a good moment to go back and learn some history, reread some great biographies, read a few great books about this, get the story, learn the dynamics of it. But then most importantly, relearn or discover perhaps for the first time those great truths at the heart of the matter, and realize that at this key moment, right when they were going to war, they were literally about to be invaded. Washington, New York, waiting for the British to land troops. At that very moment, in the heat of it all, and here they wrote this document. And here's what it says. That strikes me as a great story. That's the story I wanted to tell in my book. Here's the story. And then, because once you see that story, that dynamism, that sacrifice, that seriousness, these ideas take on so much more a powerful meaning, and you see why they have shaped our history ever since. Why people have sacrificed, why the people have died for this country because of those principles. That strikes me as a powerful reason to not only remember this anniversary, but be perfectly honest, to love this country. It's worth loving because of these principles.
Amen. Very well said. Well, Dr. Spalding, I thank you for joining us. Did you say you have a book out? Would you like to tell anybody if they like what you have?
It's called The Making of the American Mind, The Story of Our Declaration of Independence. And I wrote it end of last year, so it would be out this year for the anniversary. And it tells the story of the Declaration, how it was written, the meaning of the terms, the words, a lot of things we're talking about here, because I wanted Americans to relearn that story and fall in love with their country again. It's a great country because of these things, and this is the right time to go back and learn it anew. So yes, The Making of the American Mind. Great.
Well, hopefully, folks, go check it out. Keep diving deep on this, about our principles, our founding document, so we can be better and better citizens. So, Dr. Spalding, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Please don't take them for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.